Pistol Pete Rollick was a name that struck fear in the Bronx. As the ruthless leader of sex, money, murder, he built a violent empire before his world came crashing down. His rise was fast, his fall even faster. It's also been rumored that 50 Cent is producing a show based on Pistol Pete's reign in the Bronx. But what made him so powerful, and what led to his downfall? By the time he was just 21, rumors circulated that he had taken the lives of over 30 people. In today's rap culture, artists often reference smoking on dead ops. But during Pistol Pete's time, he was known for what he called wet t-shirt contests. This was his term for murders where he would shoot his victims so many times that their shirts would be drenched in blood. During the 1990s, Pistol Pete gained notoriety as the leader of a violent gang known as Sex, Money, Murder, SMM. The gang was founded in the Soundview neighborhood of the Bronx and became infamous for pulling up on bikes and opening fire on their enemies. What started as a local crew quickly expanded into a powerful criminal organization, extending its influence across all 5 boroughs of New York and along the East Coast. The impact of SMM was so significant that even some of New York's biggest rappers, including Nas and 50 Cent, referenced them in their music. 50 Cent has even expressed interest in creating a show about them, highlighting their undeniable influence on the city. To this day, SMM remains active, with Bronx drill rappers like K-Flock continuing to claim affiliation. Pistol Pete, whose real name was Peter Rollick, was born in 1974 and grew up in the crime-ridden Soundview and Castle Hill sections of the Bronx. These areas were notorious for drug activity and violence. His father, a hustler, was in and out of jail throughout Pete's early life. Eventually, he was sentenced to 50 years in prison for drug trafficking while working with the infamous New York drug kingpin Nicky Barnes. Despite his father's absence, Pete idolized him and aspired to follow in his footsteps. As a young child, he attended Catholic school and was relatively well-behaved, but after switching to a public high school, his mother noticed a drastic change in his behavior. By the time Pete was 17, his mother could no longer control him and sent him to live with one of his father's old friends. Unfortunately, this only pushed him deeper into the street life. The man he lived with was also a hustler and took Pete under his wing, introducing him to the drug trade. Pete quickly built a small crew and started distributing drugs. In 1993, he officially formed Sex, Money, Murder. Although the gang's name might sound unusual, it was a phrase commonly associated with Soundview at the time. Locals would often say, "I'm from Soundview, where it's all about sex, money, and murder." Pete and his crew simply adopted the phrase as their own. Under Pete's leadership, SMM developed a reputation for being one of the most ruthless and violent gangs in New York. They were known for robbing and extorting drug dealers and taking whatever they wanted. If Pistol Pete wanted your chain, he was going to take it. SMM was also notorious for robbing people at the legendary Tunnel nightclub. Pete, known for his love of drama, would sometimes test the courage of rival stick-up crews. If he heard that robbers were targeting people in the club, he would gather his friends' chains, put them all on, and dare anyone to try and take them from him. His fearless and ruthless nature cemented his status as one of the most feared figures in the New York underworld. Pistol Pete earned his name because of his love for shooting. He was so reckless with his gun that his friends often had to calm him down to prevent him from opening fire in the middle of a crowded street. However, the only thing he loved more than asserting his dominance through violence was making money. By the time he was 20, he had already become a millionaire. With Soundview completely under his control, Pistol Pete managed the flow of drugs in and out of the neighborhood. He also expanded his operations beyond New York, distributing cocaine to places like Pennsylvania and the Carolinas. However, one particular trip to North Carolina would come back to haunt him. Pete usually traveled on out-of-state trips as an enforcer, and his reputation alone was enough to keep people in line. On one routine trip to North Carolina, an issue arose with a customer who owed him $90,000 for a cocaine deal, but couldn't pay. Pete initially wanted to kill the man on the spot, but decided to give him one more day to come up with the money. The next day, the dealer disappeared. Furious, Pete announced that he was going after the dealer's family, but before he could leave, the police ambushed him and his crew, arresting them all. Later, Pete discovered that the North Carolina dealer he had been working with was actually a longtime police informant. During the arrest, a K-9 unit searched the van Pete had used for the trip and signaled the presence of drugs. However, the police couldn't find anything because the vehicle had hidden trap compartments designed specifically to transport drugs. The authorities, realizing this, impounded the van so they could dismantle it and find the hidden stash. Pete and his crew were taken into custody, but they managed to make bail and return to New York before North Carolina police could fully confirm their identities. SMM continued operating in North Carolina, but the next time Pete would return to the state, it would be in a prison van. For the time being, though, Pete put the case behind him because he had bigger problems waiting in New York. During the 1990s, SMM carried out dozens of murders to maintain control of the streets. In 1994, Pete personally killed a rival drug dealer named Carlton Hines. Hines was a legendary hustler with deep ties to the streets, but he was also a promising basketball player with a college scholarship. However, whatever beef existed between him and Pete led to his demise. As Hines was leaving his stereo shop, Pete ambushed him, shooting him dead. He also shot one of Hines's friends during the attack, but later made sure to eliminate him as well, fearing that he might cooperate with the police. Despite his efforts to cover his tracks, law enforcement caught up with Pete. In 1995, he was arrested for the murder of Carlton Hines and sent to Rikers Island. While incarcerated, he was approached by members of the Bloods. The United Blood Nation, UBN, had been formed in Rikers Island 2 years before Pete's arrival, and its members wanted him to join. However, Pete refused to be a follower. He agreed to join only under the condition that he could create his own set under the UBN umbrella. The Bloods accepted, and from that point on, SMM became an official Bloods-affiliated gang. Pistol Pete aligned with other Blood sets, including the 9 Trey Gangsters, the same gang that rapper Tekashi 6ix9ine would later testify against. Despite being incarcerated, Pete continued running Sex Money Murder, SMM, from behind bars. Eventually, he managed to post bail and return to Soundview. Upon his release, he spread Blood's influence throughout the neighborhood, and soon, Soundview was covered in red. However, just 2 weeks after his release, Pete was back in court. The murder charge for Carlton Hines was dropped due to a lack of witnesses, but his past in North Carolina caught up with him. Authorities there had identified his fingerprint from a prior arrest and were now pursuing a drug case against him. As soon as he left the courtroom, New York authorities took him into custody and extradited him to North Carolina. He was only 21 years old, but it would be the last time he ever walked free. Pete was convicted on federal drug and firearm charges and sentenced to 45 years in prison. Many of his former crew members had turned against him, and investigators had intercepted dozens of letters from jail, proving that Pete was still running SMM from behind bars, even ordering murders. However, the police weren't going to let him continue unchecked. Eventually, a federal indictment was unsealed in New York, charging Pete and 10 other SMM members under the RICO Act. Prosecutors described SMM as a violent criminal organization involved in large-scale drug trafficking, armed robberies, and contract killings. They linked at least 9 murders to the gang, arguing that Pete was issuing assassination orders from his jail cell. One of these killings became infamous. Fearing that an associate might testify against him in the North Carolina drug case, Pete ordered his execution. The associate and another man were shot and killed at a community football game in what became known as the Thanksgiving Day murders. Facing overwhelming evidence and the possibility of the death penalty, Pete pleaded guilty to racketeering. Ironically, he was sentenced in the same courthouse where his father had received his own prison term 2 decades earlier. The court handed Pete 3 consecutive life sentences, plus an additional 105 years, ensuring he would never leave prison. But the punishment didn't stop there. Because he had a history of running SMM from behind bars, authorities transferred him to ADX Florence, the most secure federal supermax prison in the United States. For the past 20 years, Pete has been in solitary confinement, with only his close family and lawyer allowed to contact him. Following his final conviction, New York police distributed flyers throughout Soundview with his face on them, warning locals with the message, "Don't be next." They knew his influence was dangerous and wanted to prevent young people from idolizing him. Despite these efforts, Pete's legacy in New York remains undeniable. He is still considered a street legend, and many young people in the city continue to look up to him. Even from inside America's most secure prison, Pistol Pete's name continues to carry weight, solidifying his status as an underworld icon. If you enjoy this video, don't forget to hit the like button. Click the video above for more videos on underworld icons.